the sexy guys. Explore what sexy guys do. Explore what's all on their minds. Yeah, not a thing or two, but about a thing or two. About a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no thinking that would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name's Mark. I'll be your host for this week. And as always, I'm joined by Joe, an old friend from college. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hope to figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Joe, one of the merits of this podcast is it allows me to complain about things that have been bothering me for a while. And this is one of those things. Like, I am a entertainment omnivore. I suck down all the movies and the TV shows I can manage. And so that's drama, that's comedy, that's thrillers. I like superhero movies. I like hard-hitting, depressing dramas. I pretty much like them all. And yet, when it comes around to award season, it's pretty clear that the Academy, and in many cases the Emmys, think that one is better than the other. It's very hard to win an Academy Award as a comedy. And the Emmys fairly recently had a phenomenon where a show called The Bear, which is a very hard and rather depressing drama, kept being submitted as a comedy and winning for Best Comedic Series because the drama series was so stacked. And so they were actually giving the comedy awards to a non-comedy. And I've always been bothered by that because in my mind, comedy excellence is on a par with dramatic excellence. And yet it seems like our intellectual elites do not agree. So I sent you off in pursuit of an answer to the question, why is it that we tend to think that drama that's hard and dark and depressing and shows us the worst parts of human nature, why do we tend to think that that's more important and more award-worthy than comedy? And I am aware that the question is possibly suspect in its very merits, but I'm interested to hear what you came across.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll tell you is that it's not suspect. There's a lot of evidence for this, and which I'll get into. But I didn't know that thing about The Bear. You know, I don't pay attention to the awards programs, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised, given the research I just did, that they're even kind of insinuating drama into the comedy categories for TV.
Yeah.
So in light of what I'm about to tell you, I think we'll both agree that's not surprising. But last time when you teed this up for me, you started with talking about Rob Reiner. So that's where I wanted to start as well, because I want to start by saying I'm not going to take a position on Rob Reiner's best film, since I've only seen a few of his films. But I will say that This Is Spinal Tap is one of my favorite films of all time and would definitely make my top 10, or perhaps I should say my top 11.
This is a top to what we use on stage, but it's very, very special because if you can see, the numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board. 11, 11,
and most of
11,
the amps go up to 10.
Exactly.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? It's not 10. You see, most blokes are going to be playing at 10. You're on 10 here, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. You're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly. What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Yeah, I remember I saw Spinal Tap in the theater sitting next to you, Joe. I loved it as much as you did.
Yes.
And the phrase turning it to 11 has become such a part of the lingo that my wife, who has never seen the movie, uses that reference of taking it to 11.
Yes. At least judging from recent Oscar ceremonies, the premise of your question appears to be correct. Serious and often dark dramas receive far more critical acclaim than comedies and lighter fare. Of course, the Emmy Awards have separate categories for drama and comedy programs. But since you just pointed out that The Bear was slipped in as a comedy last time, maybe that is distinction without a difference. The last straight comedy film to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards was Woody Allen's Annie Hall, which came out in 1977, nearly half a century ago. According to a study that looked at all the films nominated for Best Picture between its inception in 1928 and 2010, dramas were more than 4 times as likely to win as comedies. This extends to the acting and directing categories as well, where dramatic films and roles are far more likely to win Oscars than comedic ones. The journalist Jessica M. Goldstein, writing for Think Progress, argues provocatively that, quote, by all but ignoring comedic work, the Academy takes the public stance that comedy lacks significant artistic merit, that pleasure is wrong, and anything that causes enjoyment is frivolous at best, suspect at worst, that a comedic work, all else being equal, will never have as powerful an impact on our culture at large as a dramatic one, end
Right.
quote.
Yeah. And I also might point out that the same perspective shows up within the career arcs of famous comedians. From Robin Williams to Steve Martin to Adam Sandler, they move from comedy to drama. And there are very few examples. Maybe Robert De Niro in Meet the Parents of going from drama to comedy. Generally speaking, a comedian who wants to be taken seriously does something dark and depressing. He doesn't just do a much better comedy.
Yes, and for the longest time, I thought that's because the comedic actors thought they were rotting away in comedy and wanted to stretch themselves in drama. But maybe the answer is that the only way they're going to get taken seriously is to do drama because the world seems to think drama is a more serious genre.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Before I dive deeper into this phenomenon, I want to say a couple things that might serve as breadcrumbs for my answer. First, when considering the proposition that we value drama over comedy and think of it as a more worthy or significant art form, I think it's really important to understand who we is in that sentence. So I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And second, because you framed your question as drama versus comedy, I'm going to limit my presentation to those two genres in both film and TV. I'm not going to focus on other film and TV genres like action, sports, sci-fi, or fantasy, except to say that they don't win many Best Picture Oscars either.
Right.
Nor
Yeah.
do films directed by women, or until quite recently, films that center the experiences of women or people of color.
Right.
So let's try to keep those 2 points in mind as we move forward. The argument that drama is better than comedy has deep roots in Western thought. The world's first comedy basher might have been Plato, who found the comic revels of his time, which revolved around animal masquerades and phallic processions, to be wild and vulgar. Plato thought the object of laughter was vice, and thus, when devising rules for the education of young guardians in his ideal state, he insisted that they mustn't be prone to laughter. Some scholars think that Plato had a bee in his bonnet about comedy because of the way his Greek contemporary, the playwright Aristophanes, mocked Plato's mentor Socrates in his plays. Plato's foremost student, Aristotle, agreed with his teacher that the essence of laughter was ridicule and delighting in the suffering of others. In his Poetics, written in the 3rd century BCE, Aristotle differentiated between comedy and tragedy. Tragedy, he wrote, dealt with serious, important, and virtuous people, whereas comedy was focused on the weaknesses and foibles of less virtuous people. Aristotle advocated for drama as the locus of morality and profound truths, the place where we confront uncomfortable realities, while establishing comedy as an enjoyable escape from reality. And to my earlier admonition that we think about who is the we making such determinations, I want to point out that Aristotle was the preeminent philosopher of his day and also a polymath considered by many to be the world's first scientist, logician, and ethicist. In other words, he was an elite.
Yeah, you taking me through that has brought some things back to me. I remember studying classical Greek in grad school and struggling to acquire the vocabulary to understand the fart jokes that Aristophanes had throughout his comedies. But the point you make about the elite is very on point because when I think about it, tragedy tended to be about people like Oedipus, princes, kings, lords.
Right,
You saw
right.
Agamemnon there. Like it was the elite were the stars of tragedy, and comedy, particularly as Aristophanes did it, often presented sort of an overturning of that hierarchy where servants would get the better of their masters. The slave would humiliate the Lord. And I wonder for the elite of the day whether or not they felt that laughter was a little bit too pointed at them and took a little bit of offense at it and pushed back by way of saying that comedy is base, whereas tragedy is more refined and proper.
Yeah, you're right on it here, Mark. And this is why I said this question of who we is a breadcrumb, because I'm going to come back to this again and again throughout my presentation. So keep that thought because that's right on point for where I'm going with this.
Okay.
The cultural bias against comedy didn't end with the ancient Greeks. It persisted over time. The 17th century British philosopher Thomas Hobbes believed that those who laughed the most sought out the imperfections of others so as to feel better about themselves and superior to the hapless targets of their humor. That sounds to me like a close cousin to Schadenfreude.
Mhm.
The Puritan and Victorian eras also saw numerous condemnations of comedy and laughter by the ruling elites. Why might the elites favor drama over comedy? Or, as you put it in your question when you gave it to me last time, the dark over the light? I'm going to offer three reasons. The first is about formal structure. The best dramas are designed with an intricate narrative structure, nuanced character development, and top-end production values. In TV drama, the shift in recent years toward binge streaming favors long-form serialized storytelling, often full of plot twists and revelations, and it rewards deep character investment. High-profile Hollywood dramas often have blockbuster-level budgets and expensive casts. Prestige TV dramas have cinematic visuals. They're considered more technically challenging to produce than the standard multi-camera TV situation comedy, which uses a standalone episodic format and relies on repetition and familiarity, which can feel quaint and hidebound alongside all those exquisitely produced dramas. Perhaps that's why the traditional sitcom, which used to dominate TV comedy, is in deep decline, constituting only 1.7% of new TV series in 2025. It's been largely replaced by a hybrid form called dramedy that's equal parts irreverent humor and dark drama, and that trend seems to be spreading to Hollywood as well. The second reason for the elite consensus on drama over comedy concerns their relative significance. The best dramas typically have a deeply solemn tone and a seriousness that's often associated with wisdom. They engage with weighty moral issues, touch on edgy themes, and their protagonists are often morally compromised anti-heroes who recognize their moral error through suffering. Such stories often explore the darker aspects of human experience, like personal ambition, alienation, family conflict, social fragmentation, and the search for meaning. Drama's themes resonate with audiences because they're universal. People are drawn to it because they can relate personally to the realistic characters and scenarios depicted, which cause them to reflect on their own values and beliefs. Drama is also seen as more heartfelt than other genres because it confronts uncomfortable realities about life's fragility. The intelligentsia, from Aristotle to today's highly educated academics and media critics, the gatekeepers, I'll call them, equate that edgy darkness with depth, intellectual rigor, and artistic ambition. By contrast, comic figures are thought not to experience the moral learning or regeneration that dramatic protagonists experience. Comedy, with its focus on jokes, pratfalls, and sight gags, is frequently dismissed as low art, meant merely to entertain the masses rather than challenge them with profound insights. It has lower cultural value, less aesthetic sophistication and moral complexity than drama. It's seen more as light entertainment than groundbreaking art. The third reason centers on a particular way audiences receive drama as opposed to comedy. Dramas with intense emotional, subversive, or even violent content, the stuff that makes them feel so serious, evoke intense emotional responses in their viewing audiences like fear, anger, grief, or empathy. The subsequent release of those emotions often triggers catharsis, a state of purging and cleansing of emotional burdens that has been remarked on approvingly all the way back again to Aristotle. Catharsis can be exhausting. It leaves a lasting impression that the industry frequently equates with high art and remembers at awards time. The gatekeepers also find drama easier to judge in that a powerful dramatic scene is thought to be universally resonant, whereas if a comedy's jokes fail to land, the critic might dismiss the entire work as poor. As one academic put it, quote, "The pleasures of comedy derive from ridicule at the salient failings possessed by whomever or whatever is the joke's object. The responses involved are thus simple in structure and based on antipathy or at the very least indifference." End quote. I want to make one other point about the incentive structure of awards programs. The film and television industries burnish their credentials through the production of movies and TV series created in part to compete for and win annual prizes. Awards like the Oscars and Emmys were established to recognize the highest level of achievement in filmmaking, which has historically been defined by works that mirror the high art achieved by classic works of literature or theater. They typically favor films and roles that depict suffering or profound transformation. Dramatic works that evoke profound emotional responses like catharsis have a built-in advantage over comic works that generate only laughter. Of course, the perceived superiority of dramas and dark storytelling over light content like comedy is not an inherent truth. Rather, it's a reflection of elite critical consensus at a given time. Granted, it's a cultural and philosophical bias with roots in antiquity, which makes it hard to dislodge. I think that's why the so-called golden age of television of the late 1940s to early 1960s and the peak TV era from the late 1990s to mid-2010s were both dominated by dramas. The former featuring live theater-based teleplays produced for anthologies like Playhouse 90, and the latter taped multi-episodic series centering around the travails of tortured anti-heroes like The Sopranos, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad. Comedies are excluded from most gatekeepers' lists of best movies and TV shows.
Yeah, it's true.
Critical trends and audience preferences are constantly evolving. There's already a backlash to some prestige TV dramas where they're criticized as being so unremittingly bleak and grim as to be cliché. Notwithstanding the 2,000 plus year bias against comedy, I don't think it's impossible that great comedies might someday be accorded the same or at least similar respect as the most compelling dramas. It's happened before. Annie Hall did win Best Picture in our lifetime, and it beat out Star Wars to get that Oscar. And it'll happen again. Which brings me to my pushback against the cultural hegemony of drama. Let me just say, I have no dog in this race between drama and comedy. The relentlessly dark series The Wire is one of my favorite things I've ever watched, right up there in my top 11 list with This Is Spinal Tap. I just don't ascribe to the drama good, comedy bad dichotomy. And so I'm going to make some points about the audience for comedy, about its popularity, about its quality, and then loop back to the false dichotomy. Whether or not it wins statuettes, comedy has been enormously popular throughout the entire history of film and TV. I'm thinking now of Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers in early Hollywood, or I Love Lucy and the Honeymooners during the infancy of the small screen. Charlie Chaplin was the world's biggest movie star and arguably its most famous person during the silent film era of the 1920s. Albert Einstein was one of Chaplin's biggest fans. I didn't know that till I researched this episode. The 1953 episode of I Love Lucy, in which little Ricky was born, was a massive cultural event whose likes we'll probably never see again. 71% of American households watched it. 8 of the 10 most watched series finales in American TV history were sitcoms. I cite these statistics because there's another we out there, composed of people who don't have film studies degrees from Yale, don't write movie reviews for the New York Times, don't sit on the board of the Motion Picture Association or the Television Academy. These folks are not the gatekeepers, they're not the tastemakers, they're just the audience. But there's an awful lot of them, and they speak loudly through their viewing habits.
Yeah. Do you think possibly that's part of what's going on here? The notion that because it's popular, it's of lesser quality? Because I've definitely heard that about music. Like any band that is
Yes.
popular cannot be good. Like any hipster will tell you that once people discover a band, it becomes less good. And
Yes.
I'm thinking of the various streaming channels and like the properties that are in high demand because it brings subscribers along. And it's things like Friends, or it's the DC, superhero things
Yes.
like Batman and Superman, none of which would
Big
ever
Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory, none of which would ever win awards. And I'm wondering if within the elite enclave where they vote for these things, if there's some thought that this is too popular to be important. Like if you sell too many tickets, maybe that disqualifies you from an Emmy or an Academy Award.
Yeah, it's an intriguing thought, and I must admit I have been pissed off my whole adult life about people who think that popular things can't be good, and once they're popular, they're no longer good. But I didn't research that, so I don't want to say whether that's part of the thinking of the elite consensus.
Mhm.
The point I want to make here is that there is another we out there, and it's not the elites, and they have a lot of say in what is good and what's not good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us. Because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. And did you know that you can now listen to full episodes of Mansplaining on YouTube and check out our podcast music on Spotify? Yep, it's true. Just type Mansplaining Podcast into the search bar on either platform and you'll find us. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really. The enduring popularity of so-called low art like comedy might not be a mic drop moment in rebutting drama's hegemony, but it certainly matters. Just because something is popular with the rubes doesn't necessarily mean it's not good, which is what we were just saying. Some works of comedic art were wildly popular precisely because they were great. Critics lauded Chaplin's physical comedy and poignant storytelling in films like City Lights and The Gold Rush. He is unquestionably in the pantheon of great filmmakers, and his Little Tramp is one of the indelible characters in cinema history. Many comedies sell millions more tickets than the dramas they regularly lose to at the Academy Awards. In the TV world, the gatekeepers artificially elevate the status of niche dramas over comedies that enjoy much higher ratings, and perhaps we should be asking why. In their 2011 book, Legitimating Television, Michael Z. Newman and Ilana Levine argue that the recent legitimation of peak TV era programming like The Sopranos, The Wire, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad privileges the elite over the mass and the masculine over the feminine, reinforcing old cultural hierarchies that have long contributed to class and gender inequalities. Noah Berlatsky, writing for the news blog Pacific Standard, points out how such elite judgments are couched in class. Quote, only those who can afford more expensive cable service or who have the leisure time, internet connectivity, and social circles to know which shows to stream have truly educated tastes. It's these privileges that allow an enlightened few to appreciate the subtle nuances of, say, characters shooting each other over meth on Breaking Bad, end quote. As the blog for the Parents Television and Media Council put it, quote, it is only today's narcissistic industry minds that automatically assume that a show is somehow more sophisticated if it features nudity, graphic disembowelment, and characters who spew the F word, end quote. To Newman and Levine's point about peak TV preferring masculine to feminine, consider this. One of the supposed strengths of contemporary TV drama that I mentioned earlier is its long story arcs which unfold as serial narratives over multiple seasons. But daytime TV dramas, dismissively referred to for decades as soap operas, share many of those qualities. As Berlatsky writes, quote, do formal qualities distinguish The Sopranos from Days of Our Lives? Or is the real difference found in assumptions about who is thought to be watching? End quote. These writers argue not only that the DNA for so-called peak TV can be found in soap operas, sitcoms, and other forms considered lowbrow by most gatekeepers, but also that some of the supposedly lowbrow content might stack up favorably to the competition. Here's Berlatsky again, quote, fun for the whole family can be smart and bizarre. Grim truths for urbane connoisseurs can be cliched and unimaginative, end quote. Perhaps if more women and more economically diverse filmmakers were allowed to produce more film and TV, or review that work, or be better represented on the awards granting bodies, some of those dark, edgy dramas might recede in cultural importance. In prepping for this taping, I read the work of several scholars who try to make the case for comedy in the way it connects and resonates with its audience. I could go on about how good comedy is life-affirming, emphasizes social integration, questions authority, and tolerates human frailties. I could talk about how comic protagonists are more likely to learn and recover from their mistakes, more likely to laugh at their problems, and less likely to engage in self-pity or curse their fates like dramatic characters do. I could cite psychological studies about how humor correlates with self-esteem and creativity, or medical studies about how it counteracts stress, boosts the immune system, and reduces pain. But none of that is responsive to your question, Mark, which is about why people think drama is superior to comedy. So instead, I want to close by saying that I think all three reasons I gave for drama's preeminence are easily rebutted. Regarding the argument about drama's intricate structure, the best comedy is also extremely complex and well made. Mark, I assume you know the British sitcom Faulty Towers starring John Cleese?
Yeah, not a devoted watcher, but I'm familiar with it and I've seen scenes.
Okay. Each 30-minute episode of that series was exquisitely structured. Every word, every gesture, every camera angle was as carefully plotted out as any prestige drama you can name. And the result is hailed today by many, including yours truly, as the funniest and best TV comedy ever made. If Faulty Towers is not your cup of tea, then how about Airplane? The format of that film, with its relentless rapid fire gags, is itself a structural marvel. As for the significance of comedy, Annie Hall is as good in Exhibit A as any. Above and beyond all the laughs in that film, and there are many, it also has insight and depth to spare. It's really a feature-length meditation about love affairs.
Let's face it, I don't think our relationship is working.
I know. A relationship, I think, is like a shark. It has to constantly move forward or it dies. And I think what we got on our hands is a dead shark.
Well, as someone who saw Jaws when he was 10 years old in the theater and was scarred by it, I will say that the only good shark is a dead shark.
Touche. To rebut the argument that only drama evokes an emotional response from viewers, I turn to Matthew Kieran of the University of Leeds. Writing in an academic journal on the topic of why comedy is the equal of tragedy, Kieran argues that comic works evoke their own curious version of catharsis in their audience. Quote, comic catharsis involves pity and hope. Our relief and joy at the happy endings in comedies is not just directed toward the central characters, but also arises out of the recognition that despite our own errors and failings, we too may nonetheless attain happiness. End quote. Ultimately, I reject the false dichotomy about drama and comedy because we need the darkness and the light. The comedian Tom Crowley, writing for a British comedy blog, put it perfectly. Quote, the light in the darkness is what shows us how deep the shadows are. Drama works best when it allows a sliver of contrasting light into even its very darkest corners. End quote. In other words, the best art achieves both.
Yeah, agreed. And personally, I feel like the catharsis point is a little bit overstated. I feel like tragedy can be cathartic, but I doubt that it is always cathartic. Like I'm thinking of a movie, Kramer versus Kramer, another movie that I saw in the theater while my parents were going through a divorce. I was quite young at the time. That divorce was kind of tearing me apart. And I did not find that movie cathartic in the slightest bit. It brought out pain, and I still have negative feelings associated with that. It's one of the few movies that I think about a lot that I've never been tempted to rewatch because it was quite non-cathartic for me. And so,
Yeah. Can I just jump in right there? Because I also saw Kramer versus Kramer as a teenager whose parents had split up about 2 years before the film. I saw the film. And it wasn't cathartic for me either, but I suspect it might have been cathartic for my parents. So maybe we were not the target audience for that movie.
yeah. Well, I can only offer this time machine recommendation to anyone seeing the movie. Do not sit next to the father who left your mother in the theater while you're watching that, because it will not
Yes.
contribute to your
Good
experience
advice.
of the film.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think the biggest point that came up in my mind during this is something that goes back to the beginning, that you started with Plato and Aristophanes. And that reminded me that comedy was originally part of religious ritual in ancient Greece. It was part of Dionysian ritual. And within that frame, the fact that Aristophanes' comedies tended to flip social hierarchies on their head had a specific ritual referent, which is this liminal period that rituals go through where things are inverted, things are turned upside down. It's kind of like carnival in Europe during the Middle Ages, where you had the Feast of Fools, where for 7 days, someone who was penniless would be crowned the king of the city. And then at the end of the period, things are returned to the way they were, but for a period there, things are upside down. And the theory about that liminal reversal is that it serves a particular social and psychological function, which is that it addresses inequities, it releases tension out of the society, it allows you to explore things outside of rigidly enforced social norms, and that there is value to that. It's freeing, it allows you to say things which are impossible to say outside of that context. And that a society basically that only had tragedy and did not have comedy would not function as well. You need both of them. They need to be paired, one building up, the other tearing down, and that those two things in concert work better than either one would on their own. And I'm not
Right.
sure that that applies to every situation, but I do think that comedy actually plays an important social function that our apportioning of awards doesn't really allow for.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm sure Aristophanes would have agreed with that too. I guess the question is, why didn't Plato, why didn't Aristotle agree?
Mhm.
There's something about the theme that came back over and over was the feeling among the elites that comedy is vindictive, that it's a way to knock the other guy down a peg.
Mhm.
Maybe comedy was not sophisticated back in the day, and it got more sophisticated as time went on because the best comedies I know of can be very poignant and life affirming and not about kicking the little guy down and
Mhm.
targeting
Well,
defenseless, hapless victims.
you'd be kicking the big guy down is the main difference. But I will say, as someone who has
Yeah.
read Aristophanes in the original Greek, there's nothing particularly sophisticated there. It's a lot of
Mm,
fart jokes and crude humor, and there's a place for that. I've laughed at crude humor in my time, but yes, I think
hmm.
more sophisticated, nuanced comedy is something that developed in later historical periods. That was not really Aristophanes' specific
Right.
place.
So maybe this is just an elite subset of the elites kind of battling over whether comedy is reflective of vice or is liberating,
Mhm. Yeah, and
because there is a lot of low comedy. What you just said about Aristophanes reminded me of the Canterbury Tales,
yeah,
Chaucer,
yeah,
it's hilariously funny, but definitely about very low things, or Don Quixote uh,
mhm, yeah,
consorting with prostitutes and thinking they're fair maidens. I mean, that's also hilarious, but not exactly high-minded.
yeah. I think that one thing that might be going on is that comedy pretty much lets the air out of pretension. And so if you're pretentious, you're going to tend to think
Ah,
of comedy as something that's directed at you and is tearing down something that you have carefully built up. And
yeah,
no one likes to be the butt of the joke. The thing about comedy, particularly ancient comedy, is it made people like Plato or Socrates the butt of the joke. And
yes,
in Plato's case, particularly, he would not have liked that Socrates was made fun of. He
right,
did not want anything that questioned the virtue of Socrates, and so he was very sensitive about that. And I also think that you could probably generalize that people who are in a position of power, it's like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where the tradition was to bring in a comedian to
yes,
roast the president. And the first president to basically cancel that was Donald Trump, who cannot sit in a room where anyone is making fun of him. Um,
Yes.
so there's a certain type of person who refuses to be the butt of the joke, and for them, comedy is the enemy, whereas uh, a more expansive consciousness understands that those things have their function.
Yeah, I think you're onto something here. I was also thinking of Donald Trump while you were speaking, a guy who can't take a joke. And then the ego of politicians, which is
Mhm.
another impediment. And the ego, not just of politicians, any of these self-important billionaires out there today, I'm quite sure that they can't take a joke either.
Right.
And yeah, that's the role of comedy, and the elites uh, are threatened by it. I think that's a really important point you're making.
Mhm. I suppose that ultimately the award that comedy gets is memory. Like I'm thinking back to the shows that I watched with my mother back in the 70s, the Mary Tyler Moore Show and MASH and Rhoda, um, All in the Family. Comedies, uh, All in the Family at least had serious themes interwoven in it, but it was a comedy. And
Yes.
I could not I'm sitting here trying to remember a single drama that we watched at the time. Like not a single title comes up. I'm sure we did. I just don't remember them.
Mm,
And so in a way, that is the award that those shows get is I'm still thinking about them 50 years later, and I have forgotten about the dramas.
right. Yeah, I'm doing that mental exercise with myself right now, and there are many fewer dramas. I remember I loved The Paper Chase. I love The White Shadow in the
The
70s. But
White
for
Shadow,
every
yeah.
one of those, there I could name five comedies that I watched religiously,
Right, right, right.
All in the Family, Happy Days, Welcome Back, Cotter. Yeah. All right, well, we're going too far down memory lane now. I hope I answered your question. I mean, the big takeaway for me is that when we talk about how we as a society look down our nose at comedy, you need to pay attention to who is we in that sentence. I mean, if there's one thing I want to leave you in the
Mm.
audience with, it would be that.
Yeah, yeah. And if I'm correct that the function of drama is to build stuff up, and the function of comedy is to tear stuff down, and that is always going to run afoul of those members of our society who are pretentious, then it's probably irreducible. Comedy is never going to be awarded at the same rate as drama because it's the pretentious people who give out the awards. But
Yes.
still, I would say comedy is playing an essential function, and anyone who doesn't recognize that function is blind to something that's very important within our society. Is that it's important to puncture to poke a hole in the pretensions of the elite. That's something critical, and we need comedians to do it for us.
Yes, well said. And I think that's a good way to end this episode.
Okay, so
Okay, I've
you
got a question for you for next time.
lay it on me.
There's a strong anti-intellectual vibe running through American politics and culture today. I see it in the MAGA right's ongoing assault against the administrative state, aided and abetted by a reactionary Supreme Court, where policy experts in all areas of the government are being fired or rendered ineffectual by our country's leaders. I see it in the growing distrust of educational institutions. I see it in the banning of books in libraries and the explosion of alternative facts on social media. I see it in anti-vaccine sentiment, which started as a left-wing movement, by the way, before being co-opted by the right. Experts arguably overplayed their hand during the COVID pandemic when people were told to stay home and children were barred from attending school in contravention of the will of many frustrated Americans. The role of experts these days seems to be in conflict with democratic processes. With that as preface, here's my question. What's the proper role of expertise in a democracy?
Okay, that's a huge one. It's going to take me a while to break that one
It
down.
is,
It's
but I
interesting.
hope a compelling one and an interesting one.
It is interesting. In an interesting way, it harkens back to the original inspiration for this very podcast, because they, as you'll remember, my thought was, on the one hand, we do need to respect expertise and listen to experts. But on the other hand, I felt like it's important for us to educate ourselves and develop opinions about these things ourselves and speak out from what we know.
Yes,
And that this podcast is sort of aiming for that second level of expertise. So expertise has always been top of mind within
yes.
mansplaining. And I look
Uh,
forward to getting into
I'm
it.
glad you mentioned that, Mark, because I had already thought that I would have brought that very point up when we come back and discuss this. Because just to add more detail to what you said, I would, as you recall, Mark, but our listeners don't know this. I was worried about doing this podcast because I thought I'd be seen as a dilettante, meddling in things I have no business meddling in. I have since come to the opinion more to your side of this equation that what we have to say matters. And if you can do the research and present thoughts coherently, that's adding to the dialogue and not detracting from it. But, there is clearly an anti-intellectual ferment going on right now. And I just want to know whether there's a conflict with democracy here, whether we need to expel the experts in order for all of us to do what you and I are doing, or whether there's a role for experts. And you take that wherever it goes.
Mhm. Well, considering that I do have a PhD, I think you can guess where I'll probably end up with this question. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting philosophical question, and I'll get into that.
Great.
And I'll spend 2, maybe 3 weeks on that, looking it up, coming up with an interesting perspective. If you know anything about me, it will probably be a historical perspective, but we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I encourage our listeners to go back to their favorite comedies and rewatch them and think about the qualities that are there and the functions that those things played in their life and in their society. In a few weeks, we can get back together when I have something to say. Until then, this is Mark, and that was Joe, and we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you next time.
I'm drama, I got consequences. Every line got a cost. I'm the echo of a choice when you realize you lost. I make kings kneel, make heroes crack and confess. I don't distract you from truth. I dress it in stress. You get chuckles and snacks. I get silence so thick you can hear your own fear when it's dark as pitch. I'm the art of what matters. When the jokes fall flat, when the laugh track fades, who you calling back?
Oh please, here comes Jung with a Shakespeare stare. Talking about pain like it's the only thing there. You make folks feel deep, then send them home hollow. I'm comedy, keeping them alive tomorrow. You worship the wound, I cauterize it with wit. Turn trauma to timing, now this craftsmanship kid. You make people heavy, stuck inside their head. I get them breathing again, yeah, I keep them fed.
Fed illusions, maybe sugar highs in disguise. I deal in the truths, you keep handing them lies. I'm the long night watch when the joke don't land, when the mask slips off and you're just a man. I don't need punchlines, I punch time, leave scars in the soul, not a rim shot rhyme. You run from the dark, I sit with it still. Ask the questions that don't bend a mere human will.
Sit with it, now you build a shrine to despair. Acting like suffering's proof that you care. You think death means pain, like joy somehow shallow. But I find insight in the absurd and the gallows. I smuggle truth past a guard with a grin. Say the thing nobody's ready to hear, then I win. You demand respect, I earn in mid-laugh. Change mine sideways, yeah, do the math.
Sideways ain't forward, I move the plot. I make people choose when they rather not. I carve out meaning with stakes so real you can't scroll past it. You gotta feel history remembers me. not the joke of the day. I'm the reason whole culture still quote what I say. When the world's on fire and the stakes are grave, they don't ask for a clown, they need to be brave.
Funny you say that. When the world is ablaze, I'm the reason people survive the days. Revolutions start with ridicule, empires crack from laughs. Ask every tyrant scared of satire's aftermath. I don't deny the fire, I point and say same, then break the tension so folks can change. You think you're eternal cool, so's the joke. Cause long after tears dry, people still gotta cope.
I make it matter,
I make it bearable,
I hold the mirror steady.
I tilt it so you actually know.
Without me, all this hollow.
Without me, it's unbearable.
You're just a joke,
You ain't nothing but smoke.
you ain't nothing to
I
smoke.
make it bearable,
I hold the mirror steady.
I tilt it so you actually know.
Without me, all this hollow.
Without me, it's unbearable.
You're just a joke.
You ain't nothing but smoke.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.